All right. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Celeste Harrison, and I'm so happy to be back from our winter break and celebrating this new year with all of you. It's so great to see you all. Let's dig in. Here at National Geographic, we believe in the power of exploration and wonder and storytelling to change our world for the better. And this Explorer Classroom YouTube show connects students from all around the world with our National Geographic explorers for short lessons and extended Q&As. Today, our explorer is Pearce Creasman, who's joining us today. Well, I guess it's tonight for him, but joining us nonetheless from Jordan, all the way on the other side of the world from me here in DC. And if you read the event description today, I'm sure you had a moment where your brain did like a total double take, because Pearce leads a team that is diving to explore underwater chambers of a pyramid. It's just super cool. What a neat combination of words. You don't see that every day. And Pearce can be called many, many different things. He is an archaeologist, an Egyptologist, a maritime archaeologist, an environmental scientist, even a dendrochronologist. I can hardly wait to learn more from him and hear him talk to us. But before we do that, I do want to acknowledge that it's not just Pearce and I today. We're joined by hundreds and hundreds of students from all over the place. So wherever you may be, give us a cheer when you hear your state, your country, your school, or your class name. Today's shout outs, we've got students representing Arizona, California, Canada, the District of Columbia, Hawaii, Iowa, Idaho, Massachusetts, North Carolina, New Jersey, New York, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Africa, Tennessee, the United Kingdom, Virginia, and Washington. We've got some specific shout outs. I want to shout out Stephen, Margot, Pamethi, Miss Lorelei's class, Mrs. Carney's 5th grade, Miss Schwick's class, Swansea Public School, the William F. Holloran School, Minter Creek, Gloucester Elementary, and the Rivendell School. And with that, I think we're finally ready to turn it over to Pearce and get going, learning all about ancient Egypt and getting a chance to dive into the pyramids of Nubia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here in the National Geographic Explorer classroom. Thank you so much for letting me have this opportunity to share some time with you and talk about the things that I do. I'm really excited about this kind of stuff, and so I'm excited to move forward and talk to you guys tonight a little bit about ancient Egypt and this other area we talk about when we talk about ancient Egypt called ancient Nubia. Now, let's go ahead and share my slides here. And hopefully you all see a presentation. So, ancient Egypt and diving the pyramids of Nubia. Now, some of you might already know this, but a lot of you probably don't, is that when we talk about ancient Egypt, we're not really just talking about one place. We're talking about a lot of different places today. Ancient Egypt encompassed a lot of territory, and it got bigger and smaller over the many thousands of years that it existed. And one of the places, one of the areas that it sometimes included is this area to the south in what is modern Sudan today that we usually call Nubia, ancient Nubia. Now, Egypt and Sudan today are different countries in the same way for a lot of time in the ancient era, they were different cultures and they had kind of different, probably different languages, different beliefs and things like this. But again, what a lot of people don't know is they shared a lot of things in common. For example, while there are about 100 and something pyramids in Egypt, there's more than 200 pyramids in Sudan today. And I'm digging at some of those pyramids in Sudan, and I want to talk to you about it. I'm really excited to explain to you why and how all this will make sense. Now, when a lot of people think about ancient Egypt, we think about pyramids, we think about the deserts, mummies, sand, stuff like this. When you do a Google search, this is what you find when you look at the images. But I'm an archaeologist. I do archaeology. It's the study of stuff, of physical stuff. We call it material culture is the special term for it. I look at stuff to understand people and the past. And I want to learn about people and their lives. When you look at the deserts and the pyramids and the tombs of places, you very oftentimes only learn about their death or what they thought was the version of the afterlife that they wanted to work with. So when we're talking about deserts for ancient Egypt, it is an important part of what ancient Egypt was, but life primarily occurred on the water. And this little green strip of down in between the two great sand seas on the side it's the Nile River. And most of the life of ancient Egypt happened on that river, but we know comparatively little about that as we do about the tombs and death afterward. This little strip of green enabled basically everything that was ancient Egypt. It was responsible for what we know and think about it. And the ancient Egyptians knew this themselves, of course. This is one of my favorite examples. Here's an example of their creation, one of their creation myths. That's how they thought the world started. What you have at the bottom is you have a very ancient, the first deity, a god called Nun, who was lifting up out of the primordial ancient waters that always used to be before creation, lifting up the major gods and major deities who would then give birth to the world as we know it and keep the world order, keep all of the good things in order and progress going and helping people to have good lives. So they even saw this basically as their own little world as an island. And that's reflected in their preparations for what comes after you pass. You can see here's an example where if in ancient Egypt, if you were a good person and lived a good life, the fundamental goal was to prepare for the afterlife. Basically, death is a doorway. You pass through this doorway and you move, if you're a good person, into continued existence in eternity forever. Basically, living your best life as you did when you were alive. Now, now, it's a kind of a paradise. And you can see one version of it here. This comes from the tomb of a person who the waters outside and around this encompass this man's own little island. And you can look at this kind of like a comic book or a flip book. He's up here on the top level. He's tending his crops. He's farming. He's actually in the upper right, stopping to smell the roses. He's smelling the flowers. And he's there with his family, living his best life in perpetuity forever. So he's preparing for this. So even in death, they knew how important the water was. So I study this water-based or maritime life in ancient Egypt, how people lived on by near the river. And right now, I'm doing that at a place in ancient Nubia, we call today modern Sudan. Now, there was a time in ancient Egyptian history where this entire area that you see here was ruled by pharaohs or kings from what is today Sudan, and it's called the 25th dynasty. And not a lot of people know about this time, but it was a really important part of our shared human history. Now, a lot of the kings from this period um, are buried at a place called Nuri here in Sudan. And at Nuri, there was something like 80 pyramids at this one site alone for kings and queens, and you can see some of them here. So we are excavating here in what we call the Kingdom of Kush in what is modern day Sudan about this one part that overlaps with Egyptian history but has its own wonderful and distinctive history unto itself and trying to learn more about it. Now, in the satellite image here, you can see all of the little bumps in the sand that are inside the blue circle were about 2,000 years ago, they were pyramids themselves on the surface, and then cut into the rock underneath, there were tombs for prominent or wealthy people of the time. When you look at some of those tombs, some of the smaller ones, this is a one-room tomb that was made for a queen, you can see some really incredible finds and some really wonderful examples that feels very Egyptian. Yes, it's distinctively Nubian in its art, but it's really Egyptian. I mean, there are hieroglyphs here. You've got the queen, Yaturo is her name, asking Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and Isis, one of the most important goddesses in the ancient Egyptian pantheon, to help her make it to that paradise I mentioned successfully and live well. Now, Yaturo is an important character in our shared history. She was what must have been a very powerful and influential daughter of one of the most important kings of ancient Egypt, a king called Taharka. He's mentioned in the Bible several times, and so his existence and understanding his family better helps us to understand all the interconnected things that are going on in the ancient world at this time, which still matter to us today. Now, in excavating a lot of these places, in excavating these tombs 100 years ago, somebody went to this site at Nuri and started looking around and excavated some of the sites and some of the tombs, but not all of them. And when he was there, he found things like this. This is called the Treasure of Espelta. It comes from a really big pyramid at Nuri, and it's got lots of shiny, pretty things, and looks very Egyptian. But the last time anybody worked at this site was 100 years ago. And when they were working there, they found some things. They found wonderful things like this. But they also encountered a situation like this, going into the tombs underneath, cut into the bedrock underneath the pyramids, through a long stair. Usually there's a long stairway, and the photographer here is standing in the stairway looking into the door of the tomb. You can see there's water. And 100 years ago, maybe that water was up to your knee or up to your hip. So they left a lot of the tombs in their ancient conditions. They weren't able to excavate all of this stuff safely, and so they didn't do it. They just didn't have the tools and technologies that we now have today. When they were excavating, it was still 50 or 60 years in the future before the first self-contained underwater breathing apparatus was invented, or what we call scuba gear. And so they just didn't have the tools to do this and do it safely. So now 100 years later, we're thinking, well, gosh, we'd really like to learn more about this kingdom of Kush, the people of Nuri, and these really important overlaps with the ancient Egyptian kingdom and our shared history. So we went back and started digging in some of the places where we know they didn't dig everything. So we can go and look for those material culture, that stuff that people have left behind, and help it to tell the story of this place and these people. Now, this is on a little hillside just off the river. And so in the ancient period, when they made these tombs, they probably cut all the way down to the water level where underground in the bedrock, the base water level was. And that was pretty deep. You could see that in the last image between about 300 BC and 1900 AD, 100 years ago. In that 2200 year period, the water had risen some. Maybe it's a foot, maybe it rose 2 feet or something like this. But when we started digging here a couple of years ago, what we found was amazing. We found, you can see here, the pyramid on the surface, the tomb cut in underneath. This is like if you were able to cut the earth in half and look at it from the side. But we found that the water level was much, much higher. The water level now, instead of being up to your knee or your waist, it could have almost a 3-story building totally submerged underwater. The roof of almost a 3-story building could be under this water. And so it's changed a lot in a very comparatively short period of time. Now, this has a complex a group of reasonings. It is in part due to natural climate change. It is in part due to human accelerated climate change. And it's in part due to human actions on the land around the site. Irrigation, farming, things like this, making dams on the Nile River. All of this stuff has an impact on the groundwater level, making it rise considerably. So we're looking at this and we're saying, my goodness, how are we going to do this? How are we going to learn this? We want to go into these burial chambers that we know are under the pyramids, and we want to learn stuff and get it out. But how do you actually do something like that? So we decided, let's do it underwater. Let's see what we can do. And now no one has ever excavated a tomb underwater before anywhere in the world. And so it was complex, and it was like a really interesting and tough puzzle to put all the pieces on the table and figure out how to do it when no one's ever done a thing like this. So right now I want to share with you some videos of us doing this for some of the first times.
Yes. Okay. Work up on the sides. No one crosses the temple. First work dive in Mr. Austin's tomb. You ready?
We are ready.
All right, I'm going in.
So you have to walk down this ancient stairway into the water and go right into the darkness before you can get into the tomb itself. And so I've stopped it here because I want to take a moment. When you're doing this, it's exhilarating. You feel your heart racing, but you also feel grateful for all the people who've helped you to get to this. In a big complex thing like this, you just never do it alone. There are a lot of people, and I can't thank everybody and acknowledge everybody, but it's important now to say that this kind of thing, I'm going to show you what's inside the tomb in a second, don't worry. This kind of thing couldn't have happened without National Geographic's support, without the support of the government of Sudan and the people who live in the area around the site. They helped us with everything. There's an organization in Sudan responsible for all the archaeology called the National Corporation of Antiquities and Museums. And with their help, we were able to do something really wonderful and difficult because people wanted to. So here's what happens when you get inside the tomb. And here I'm going to show you, it's a little bit murky at first, but it clears up. Don't worry, it'll start to make more sense. But a little bit into it, I want you to be aware there are a lot of hazards and a lot of problems doing this sort of thing. You're going into a dark cave no one's been in for thousands of years. And we're doing it based on basically having a garden hose attached to our mouth and a pump on the surface giving us air. You have to be attentive to your air hose. And so we'll note one point back here where we go back to make sure our line doesn't have a crink in it and stop us from breathing. So here you can see we're coming to the end of the first room, the first chamber. There's a big open second chamber, and in the distance in the back you can see the third one. The third one is where the king himself is buried. Now, remember the point of these things. For the ancient Egyptians, and these tombs are modeled off of that Egyptian mindset, the point of the tombs is to fill them up with stuff you need to live your life forever, in eternity. So on the floor of each of these rooms, and the rooms are big, each one's about big enough to park your bus in. On the floor of each of these rooms, they would have had things stacked that you need for living life forever. All of the nice stuff you didn't want to be without. Now you can't see the floors in the room here. Actually, you see there's a division. You can see the very clear water at the top and then the really murky water in the bottom. This has to do with some quirks of the way that the dust is and the temperatures of the water and the pressures and everything. But there's a good 4 or 5 feet. So everybody who's watching this, and I can in most days, I would be standing there. If I were standing right in the middle of that image and I'm 6 feet tall, you'd barely be able to see the top of my head because there's still so much more to go down underneath. But when we finally get down under there, we start to find some really neat stuff. Like this. Little statues. These are made for the king, and we like to believe that they have the face of the king on them, but we don't really know that that's exactly the case. They certainly have the king's name on them. These little statues are called shabtis. They're supposed to be servants, and there were lots of them. Why do you need these little servants? Because these things are supposed to magically charge and come to life in the afterlife and do all of the work for the king on his behalf. Who wants to work for eternity? So these are basically the king's retirement plan. And of course, in a king's tomb, we find some gold and we find little statues. We found this little bronze statue of a bird. And why is a little bronze statue of a bird important? This is one of the most important gods to ancient Egypt. One of the most important deities in ancient Egypt is this falcon deity called Horus. And we think this is a version of the falcon deity called Hemen, who's a distinct deity known almost exclusively to this area of ancient Nubia. It's really rare. There's really only one other physical representation of this god, and it looks like this. Now, we didn't find this at Nuri. This is in the Louvre, which is the biggest and most important museum in France. But what you see here is you see the ancient god Hemen, this very Nubian, this very Kushite deity, being given offerings from one of these ancient Nubian pharaohs. And in fact, this is Taharka. This is the one that's mentioned in the Bible. Taharka is buried at Nuri. His pyramid is there. It's entirely possible this came from that region, but what we think we have, based on all the pieces, is probably something like this from several hundred years after Taharka died with the king Nistasen. And I'd love to keep telling you about all the little things that we found, but I actually want to hear more questions from you. So as soon as we get there, though, I do want to invite you to think about becoming members of the very exclusive Pyramid Dive Club. How would you do so? Well, if you do well in school, learn a lot about ancient Egypt and ancient Sudan, and want to go on an adventure, you have to have a sense for adventure. Maybe one day you can do this too. Like I said, there were 80 pyramids and tombs at Nuri. We've been working on 2 of them, and it's taken us 5 years, and we're not done. There's a lot of work to do. So we'll still be working there by the time you're ready. So think about this. I do want to take one more moment just to thank the hundreds of people that go into doing a project like this. There's a lot of people, no time to mention them all. This is just one season's worth of people, and we've been doing this for several years now, but it is truly a group effort. But now I'd like to hear from this group. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if we have questions.
That was amazing. I promise you, we have plenty of questions coming in from all over the place. If you're out there watching along live on YouTube, hello, keep sending us your questions. They're really great so far. Reminder that we record everything you send us, so you only need to send your question once. And if you're up here on screen with me, get those nice loud voices ready. I'll call on you when it's your turn. Our first question is coming to us from Kato in the chat bar, who's wondering, Pearce Paul, what happens if you accidentally break an artifact? Is that common? What do you do next?
So archaeology, digging into the ground, is inherently destructive. When I dig a hole, no one else can go back and dig that hole a second time because I've already dug it. I can't ever put everything back in it. So archaeology is fundamentally about breaking things. You have to do your best to record them before you break them, while you're working on them. And then if it's something that you can put back together, we try to do that. There are specialists who work in art and conservation, and their job is to mend and repair things that sometimes we can't get them out well, sometimes we get them out and it just doesn't go the way we hoped, and sometimes time just breaks things.
Awesome. Well, for our next question, let's visit an on-screen group. We've got ISB students here with us. Who should we call in from your group?
Mila.
Mela. All right, give me just 1 second to find that microphone and turn it on for you. And what's the screen name for Mila?
Mila Simon.
Mila Simon. All right. 1 more second to find it. There we go. All right, Mila, ask away.
Does it sometimes, like, how do you like, how do you get them? You said that the stuff is mostly in the murky water. So how do you know where it is, or is it just everywhere?
Yeah, it's really hard to figure out where they are sometimes. So what we do is we know what the size of the chamber is because we go in with our lights, and for the few days that we have good clear water, because once we start working, we're kicking up all the dirt and it goes to 0 visibility. After about a week of working, we don't even bother to turn our lights on anymore because it's just a waste of battery power. So what we do is we go and we use a grid system, and we feel around with our hands and know where we are in the space inside the tomb. And then we have tape measures that we can use underwater that we can read. And sometimes you put marks in them, kind of like Braille. And we know this is 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. We orient ourselves, and then we make ourselves a little grid like this, and I will show it. We try to make ourselves little things we can write on underwater, like on the right here, and we map out where all the buckets of things we're bringing are coming from, and we make notes on it, we number them, we tag the buckets as they're going out, and we actually take the stuff out of the tomb and then sift it and look at it out of the tomb and check in often to make sure and check base and see where we are. But basically, we're working blind for most of the time with our bare hands so that we can feel everything that's going on.
So cool, and honestly a little bit scary. Your work every so often gives me the heebie-jeebies, I'm not gonna lie, but it's really, really neat. We've got a question from Marielle in the chat bar, and they're wondering, are you the person who reads the writing on artifacts? Who's decoding the objects you're finding, and how are they doing that?
Yeah, so when we're working with artifacts, if we're looking at texts, there are a lot of specialists in the world who read very specific texts, types of languages. And some people may read this one and that one, and I read this type, and my friends read other types. But usually what we do is we make an analysis in the field, and we try to figure out what the basic understanding of it is so we can continue working in the field. And then if we need a specialist, because some languages, there's only a few people in the world that can really deal with them, we send it to them afterward, and they help us out to do that.
Awesome. Gotta love teamwork. Well, let's take our next question from Ethan and Jason. Go for it, guys.
Have you ever found like any living organisms in the water in the pyramids?
So the great part about this one is that these have been under sand for a very, very long time, and the water is coming up from underground, not down from the surface. It's groundwater. It's just kind of, if you go out and dig in your yard long enough after it's been raining, you know how the water just kind of pools up even though there's no rain anymore. And so because we're taking all the sand out, there are no critters in the water that you can see. There's no animals. There's no crocodiles we're running into. The biggest thing we found is a frog. And so that was a thing that got introduced somehow overnight between during work one day.
Awesome. Our next question comes from Tyler in the chat bar, and Tyler is wondering, is this ancient belief in the afterlife still the current belief in the afterlife in Sudan?
So there are as many different people as there are in the world, or there's probably that many different beliefs in what happens after we die. And no one can tell us with certainty standing here today what that is. So this idea of ancient Egyptian, what's called polytheism, believing in multiple and many gods, actually still does exist in some systems today. Hinduism is the most prominent example I can think of. And there are parallels and parts of ancient Egyptian religion that have actually found their way into a great many modern religions. But to the best of my knowledge, at least where we're working, there's nobody who actively believes in this stuff anymore like this.
All right, cool. Well, let's take our next question from Abby, who's up on screen with us. Go for it, Abby.
I was wondering, what is your end goal when you find your artifacts? What do you hope to discover? And I was also wondering,
what do you do with them? So yes, I was wondering what do you do with your artifacts and what is your end goal?
So our fundamental reason for doing any of this is to learn. We want to help produce knowledge about this time, this place, these people. We feel like we don't know enough about what's going on in this part of the world from this time period, and we'd love to be able to learn more. So a great result for us after many years of doing this kind of work and putting all these pieces of the puzzle together is to write some papers and publish a book and talk to you about it. I want everybody here to be more aware. So this is all part of what we are doing and why this is worthwhile, because now you know about Nubia and this place called Nuri. And if we're sharing knowledge, it's basically helping in a really in a wonderful way. It's helping to do what the people built these tombs for. They wanted to live forever. If somebody's mentioning our names in a class to hundreds of people 4,000 years from now, that's a pretty good start at it. So I feel like in some way we're trying to honor them as well. Now, what do we do with the stuff after we find it? Well, we try and put the really nice pieces or the really informative pieces on display in museums so that people can continue to learn more about it. And the other pieces oftentimes we'll bury back in the ground or we'll put in government warehouses so they can keep the stuff safe.
We've got Alice in the YouTube chat bar who's wondering about grave robbers. Is that a common thing that you guys have to deal with? Is that something you encounter a lot?
So it's a thing that everybody in the world encounters. Anywhere there's an archaeological site, everywhere I have ever worked, I've worked on 4 or 5 continents now. No matter what, people believe there's gold and special, wonderful things of financial value there. And what we're really looking for of most value is the knowledge. But think about this. Think about how crazy it would be if 20 Sudanese people came to your hometown and started digging a hole in the middle of the town. You'd look at this and you'd say, what's going on? So that's exactly what's happening when we go somewhere and we go to Sudan with 20 Americans or 20 Europeans and go and say, let's dig a hole and see what's going on. People are curious. And that's wonderful because curiosity is a fantastic human characteristic. And sometimes you just need to help people learn about how to best channel that curiosity. And then sometimes too, there's always just people who want to do anything they can to make a dollar and don't care about the end result. But that's everywhere in the world.
All right. Well, for our next question, we've got Miss Jones and her 6th graders here with us. Miss Jones, what question should we ask her? Who can we call on?
Hi, I think Rauda has a question. Rauda, do you want to ask your question?
That's my question. I was just wondering, how long have you been doing this stuff?
So I've been doing this for about 20 years. This is a thing that if you love it and you know you love it early on, you just catch the bug. And if you love it, you just keep doing it and you find a way. But for most people, in order to run projects like these, you have to spend about 10 years in school and sometimes more. So, and then you actually get to go out and start doing it.
Quite an investment, but a really, really cool reward to be a pyramid diver. We've got Kaya, who's wondering what the backup plan is in case that hose fails you.
Yeah. So this is one of the things is that any type of activity like this, when you are diving and going into a place that has only one entry and one exit, it is inherently riskier than if you have, diving in a big pool where you can just come up to the surface and go out. So what we do is we take as many precautions as we can, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in this case, because you have to actually be able to implement those precautions in the place where you're working. So here I have some of my colleagues. In the red stocking cap is Justin Schneider. He's our lead dive officer. He's a professional scuba diver and diving instructor in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And then we have David Dunn on the right. And on David's hip, you see the bright yellow pack. This is right before we're getting ready to go in the water. That has a canister of compressed air. It has enough air in it so that even if we're all the way back at the end of the tomb, if you're cool, calm, and collected, like professionals and people who really know how to do and train for this stuff should be able to be, it gives you plenty of air to get out in case the generator on the surface stops, it runs out of gas, somebody trips on the line, it becomes unplugged, whatever, all these kind of things can happen. You take as many precautions as possible, but you always have to have your backup plans.
Absolutely. All right, for our next question, let's visit Sophie, who's up here on screen with us. Go for it.
Hi, I was wondering what got you interested in studying in ancient things?
What got me interested in studying ancient things? I guess I've always been curious about what happened in the past, and I like to get my hands dirty, and you can explore that curiosity and get your hands dirty at the same time doing archaeology.
Awesome. Well, we've got a pretty great question in the chat bar. We've got students wondering, Sonia among them, thank you for this question. Where are the mummies?
Where are the mummies? This is a fantastic question. So here's one of the weird things about pyramids, is pyramids are huge and they are bullseyes. They say, I was rich, I have a lot of shiny things in my tomb, please come take it from me, I'm dead and can't stop you. And so we almost never find mummies in the pyramids themselves. In Egypt proper, if my memory serves, there's only been 1 or 2 cases where we've actually found the body of the person that we actually believe was buried, whom in the pyramid, for whom we think the pyramid was built. Now in Sudan, we find it more often. But remember, these sites were worked 100 years ago, and 100 years ago, people didn't treat things the same way as we do now. And human remains are one of those things that either weren't always recorded or weren't always saved because they didn't think that we were going to learn that much from them. And so, unfortunately, we know that at Nuri, there were a lot of human remains found in these tombs, but we don't think that they mummify people in the kingdom of Kush. So this is one of those things, is there aren't Egyptian mummies like you see in the movies in Kushite tombs.
So cool, and not at all what I was expecting. That's amazing.
I know, right? So it's this example of how they're really distinctive in their own ways, but adapting these other very Egyptian styles.
So cool. Well, we've got Mr. Bickley and his 6th graders with us. Mr. Bickley, what's your question?
Egyptian mummies like you see in the
Sorry, I'm gonna walk away so we can't hear you guys in the background on my other computer. So we've been talking in my class about the importance of like struggles, and so what kind of stuff, what the struggle is that you had to face to kind of get through, and what hardships you had when you were trying to achieve this goal of taking on this job.
Yeah. So a lot of things that are rewarding are of course difficult to do. And for me, it was just the fundamental concept is when I went to this site for the first time with my friends, people I'd worked with for a decade, who've seen some of the kind of things we could do in the field and knew what we were capable of, and said, you know, guys, if those tombs are really underwater, I bet we can dig them. When your own friends are the ones telling you, this is crazy, what are you talking about? Then you have to really reevaluate some of your life choices. But it turns out that when you have friends who are honest enough to do that and say, hey, let's really think about this, that's the best part of this whole thing. It's putting together this really complex puzzle. I mean, no one's ever dived a tomb anywhere in the world before, ever. It's not a thing. There's no manual. No one had done underwater archaeology in the country of Sudan until we started doing it. So the tools weren't there. You have to build all the pieces and put them all together. It's working on a puzzle. You have no idea how many pieces there are. They're all turned around the wrong way and none of them interconnect. And you've just got to force it as you go.
So cool. Well, we've got AJ who is dying to know, Pearce Paul, how many times a year do you think you're going into different underwater tombs?
So what we do is we block a certain time every year when everybody's schedules work, and we go out as long as we can, usually as long as we have money to go out and pay everybody, etc. And so we go about 2 or 3 months a year, and then we will dive every day that we can while we're there. So we'll dive 2 or 3 months a year, usually 2 times a day, and get as much done as we can in that time. But then, of course, we have to come home to our families and things like this. They still wait for us here.
Oh, Casper is just so cute. Your dog is the best. All my cat ever does is try and knock my webcam over. Let's go to Henry for our next question. Henry, go for it.
How did you find the pyramids?
So it's a good question, because the pyramids in this part of Sudan went unnoticed for a long time. This part of Sudan was really fiercely protected and private, even when places all over the rest of Africa and the Middle East were being discovered by archaeologists and adventurers. This site, no one really visited for a very long time. And now we've known about it as archaeologists for about 150 years. But no one ever went to these sites until about 100 years ago. One guy went and he took a lot of shiny things from a lot of the big tombs and brought them back to museums. And if anybody lives in the area around Boston, if you go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, you can find a lot of these objects on display. But we knew about it for a long time. It's just there's so much stuff to do. There's only so many people who can do these things now. And I mean, people have been living and dying for thousands of years in this area. We've only been studying it for 150. So there's a lot of stuff out there to do.
Speaking of a lot of stuff out there to do, we've got Tyler wondering how to get involved in archaeology. Do you need to have a famous site, or can you just go kind of dig in your backyard?
You can definitely go dig in your backyard. You can go out in the backyard, draw a square in the backyard, and try and dig straight walls down and see if you can get down like the length of your hand or something. And now do this with mom and dad's help, of course, and make sure to not go into the rose garden because you get in trouble and things like this. But go, there's stuff everywhere. Now you have to be careful because you can't go in places where government or other people own because it's not your property. You have to get permissions to do that. But not every site is going to be famous, and not every site is going to be famous when you start working there. Maybe you make the site famous.
So cool. Well, Pearce Paul, what does it feel like to be doing this work and diving through these places that have been untouched for so long? What's the emotional journey like from start to finish?
It's an important responsibility to do it well. So you know before you ever go out there that, look, we're gonna go do this. And when we dig a shovel, no one can ever dig that place again. And if we don't do it right and we don't record the information and learn what there is to be learned, that knowledge is gone forever. So it's a big responsibility to do this, but it's also exciting. It's exhilarating. The first dive going into the water, first time going into that tomb, into the unknown, my heart was beating out of my chest. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to be on the other side. It was scary. If you're not scared, you're not ready. You're not respecting the situation and the complications of a thing like this. So you need to go through kind of the full range of experiences to be prepared for this.
That's amazing. And Pearce Paul, it really cracked me up earlier. I asked you what happens to you on your way out. That water looks pretty gross. What is the effect to you, and how do you deal with that? You want to share that answer again here?
Yeah. So we usually work in winter because in the middle of the Sahara, it's very hot in the rest of the year. So we're going out there in the winter, in their winters. And when we come out of the water, the wind is usually blowing pretty aggressively because we're on the top of a little hill and there's sand hitting you all over the place. And you're walking up this long stairway. Usually you're coming out of really cold water. You're shivering from having been in there for hours. And you get out and you go up to the top. We have a little tent. I'll show you a picture of our tent that we come out into. And so here we're standing inside the tent. You can see the tent in the top picture to the upper right, and then you can see a panorama of it inside here. And we've got a dirt floor in our tent, And basically, you come into the tent and you're sandblasted after having gotten out and walked just this really short distance from the tomb to the tent itself. You're covered in dirt and sharp rocks from what were inside the tomb because it's all jagged rock now due to the water and the breaking. And you're trying to get changed and put on your regular clothes to go back. You walk half a mile over to where the car picks us up to drive back to the house. I finish my day every day with a Red Bull and a Snickers, just because that's my safety blanket, my comfort zone afterward. And then we have first dibs on the showers every day when we get back. So that helps.
Love that. Well, Pearce Paul, beyond Red Bull and Snickers, do you have any other advice for the young explorers out there watching you today?
I do. I would tell you guys now, I want you to turn around and look and make sure your parents and your teachers aren't listening to this one for the moment. Just because somebody tells you no, you can't do a thing, doesn't mean that that's necessarily true. If you do the work, if you learn, if you're responsible, you measure the risks and try and make good, safe decisions, and you accept whatever risks are there, you probably can do a lot of things that people didn't think you could do. When we first started saying things like dive, tomb, pyramid, middle of the desert, people thought it was silly, but not everybody did. National Geographic didn't think it was silly. They supported us. Our colleagues in the government of Sudan thought it was remarkable and wanted to see this happen and did everything they could to help us. And so all it takes sometimes is just one or two people for you to really work it out with them, and you can get there.
Such amazing advice. Such cool work. Thank you so much for joining us today, Pearce Paul. For everyone out there watching, you can check out Explorer Classroom plus many, many more free educational resources at natgeoed.org. At this time next week, we'll be connecting with explorer Anusha Shankar, who studies hummingbirds. Very exciting. A quick reminder that we run these programs for ages 9 to 14 on Thursdays at 10 and 2 Eastern Time. We also have programming for ages 4 to 8 that runs on Mondays at 11 Eastern right here on the same YouTube page. You can register your student group for a chance to be featured up here on screen with us at natgeoed.org/explorerclassroom. Hope everyone out there has a great day.